Nothing creates pro wrestling headlines quicker than the exodus of a well-known performer, regardless of reason. Actually, the reason for the firing can make the story all the more delectable, especially if it's for anything other than budgetary reasons. Wrestlers have been fired under some pretty interesting circumstances through the decades, but just as interesting, some get hired back pretty quickly. Traditionally in wrestling, when a talent is let go, they either go wrestle somewhere else before long, or they fade from the industry in short order. In other words, all parties move on quickly enough. But in rarer circumstances, whether it's a day or two or maybe a few months down the line, the wrestler is rehired by their last employer, perhaps because the heat from their terminatable offense has died down. Or maybe there was a misunderstanding. Whatever the case was, wrestling promotions, especially WWE, have been known to catch their own excess on the rebound and slather it back onto the heap quickly enough. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic.com, and these are 10 wrestlers who were fired and then quickly rehired. Join us. Number 10, Drake Maverick, 6 weeks. We begin with the freshest example of the bunch. Maverick, a seemingly indispensable team player, was just one of many wrestlers and staffers let go from WWE in April of 2020, and he quickly made his disconsolation known through a widely disseminated video. Just days earlier, Maverick was named as a participant in a tournament to crown an interim cruiserweight champion in Jordan Devlin's absence, so it was a little awkward for the tournament entrant to find himself on the chopping block. Maverick was permitted to stick around for the tournament, and he suddenly became the sentimental fan favorite, because any match of his could be his WWE farewell. WWE clearly understood the groundswell behind the unintended underdog, as Maverick made it to the final after winning his group. Unfortunately, hearts were broken again when Maverick was beaten in the final match by the man currently known as Santos Escobar. But lo and behold, the office's collective heart grew 3 sizes that day, and in the post-match, Maverick was offered a new WWE contract by Triple H. Reactions to the segment were a bit mixed. Some found the idea of toying with someone's employment to be crass and far too on the nose given the state of the pandemic-rattled world, but on the other hand, good for Drake. Number 9, the Boogeyman, 2 weeks. Former Tough Enough hopeful Marty Wright was 41 years old in his first appearance on WWE SmackDown in 2005, so there was a limited amount of time for WWE to get the most out of the novice wrestler. Fortunately, Wright had cultivated the fantastical Boogeyman character, one he could entertain with without needing to wrestle all that much. His limited ability was evident in the short matches he actually did work, and after a year, WWE decided to cut Wright loose, canning him in September 2006. It was then announced the first week of October that the Boogeyman had been rehired by WWE. The actual cause of his firing isn't clear, but reports indicate that it was reigning World Heavyweight Champion Booker T that got him brought back, taking him on as a training project at his wrestling school. With the new lease on life, Boogeyman persisted onward in WWE as the worm-spewing, clock-smashing novelty act, but that act finally wore thin on the big stage in March of 2009 when Wright was released for the second time. Since then, the now 56-year-old Wright has appeared sporadically in guest spots with the Boogeyman get-up, a tribute to just how memorable that far-fetched character proved to be. Number 8, The Rockers, 1 day. The hard-partying Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty could be as wild as anyone in the wrestling business, and it would be their downfall a time or two, or perhaps several dozen. In 1987, the tag team specialists were brought in by the WWE, worked a TV taping, and were let go the following day due to a post-show skirmish at a bar. A year later, the Rockers got another chance in New York and lasted far longer the second go-around. But that ride wasn't without its share of potholes. During a tour of Europe in the autumn of 1989, the Rockers were reportedly a bit liquored up as they began smashing chandeliers in the hallway of a hotel in Brussels. As Bret Hart remembers, the pair were upset because the phone operator at the hotel couldn't get a hold of Jannetty's father, who had just had heart surgery, and things descended from there. As far as the firing goes, it's disputed if the pair were actually let go. Hart claims they were spared so as long as they paid for the damages. The history of WWE website, meanwhile, claims that they were terminated, but rehired within a day. In any event, this wouldn't be the Rockers' only brush with jagged glass. Number 7, KOKO Beware, 6 weeks. Incredibly, WARE's firing took place at just about the same times as Michael and Jannetty's situation, making this WWE's most memorable European endeavor until the plane ride from hell set the unbreakable standard 13 years later. After defeating the Brooklyn Brawler in the opener of the Brussels card, WARE got involved in a different altercation where alcohol likely played a role. At a Brussels watering hole, WARE physically scuffled with Jim Troy, a former hockey player who was now Vince McMahon's right-hand man in the office. According to Brett, WARE claimed that Troy instigated the brawl by goading him with insensitive remarks. The fight began at the bar, but didn't end there. Apparently, Troy hightailed it, and WARE followed him back to the hotel, not content to let it end with the initial dust-up. Once back at the hotel, the Birdman spotted Troy and reportedly tackled him through the glass wall of a gift shop. WARE was fired after arriving in Paris for the next leg of the tour, while Troy was also dismissed. Shortly before the 1989 Survivor Series, WARE returned to the promotion and remained a WWE regular into 1993. As for that poor hotel, just imagine the sheer sum of broken glass. Even John McClane wouldn't dare walk barefoot across it. Number 6, Emma, less than a day. Months after debuting on WWE's main roster with her stilted dancing skills, the talented Emma found herself cast out of the company following an arrest in the city of Hartford, Connecticut. While using the self-checkout at Walmart, Emma didn't properly scan an iPad case and walked out with it along with some other items she actually did pay for. Though she was arrested, it looked to be an honest mistake, and in fact some employees felt the arrest was excessive, seeing as no member of staff had pointed out the unscanned item to Emma. In the end, she did 1 day of community service and took an online course, after which the charge was dropped. Shortly after the incident, however, WWE released the real-life Tennille Dashwood, which prompted an outcry from fans. Over the preceding years, a few other WWE talents had been arrested for some far more serious infractions and still managed to keep their jobs, while Emma was immediately let go for what was really a harmless lapse in awareness. It didn't take long for WWE to reverse course and reinstate Emma back into the company, and she returned to wrestling on TV not too long after. Number 5, Eddie Guerrero, 4 months. Professional wrestling is filled with far too many tales of wrestlers who sink to rock bottom and are far too overwhelmed to answer the count. By 2001, Eddie Guerrero looked to be another unfortunate statistic, as various personal issues not only put his future as a wrestler in jeopardy, but also his private life. The demons persisted, and following an alcohol-fueled bender in November of 2001, Guerrero was arrested for a vehicular incident outside of the gated community where he lived. Days later, WWE, who had paid for his rehab earlier that summer, fired him. Getting fired did bring a swift end to Guerrero's drinking. Now gone from WWE, he took to the independent scene, working with future stars such as CM Punk, Loki, and Christopher Daniels, while getting his life back on track. By March of 2002, Guerrero found himself back in the WWE a new man and on a clearer path to redemption. This story is understandably far more serious than most entries in this video, but Guerrero's subsequent transformation is what nets it its place. In a business where demons have been known to maintain a strong upper hand, Guerrero not only beat his, but did so with remarkable quickness and thoroughness. Without question, it's the most impressive victory of Eddie Guerrero's storied career. Number 4, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, 3 months. A popular and charismatic heavyweight brawler, Duggan joined the ever-growing WWE Rogues Gallery in 1987 and took up the role of proud patriot do-gooder. He was a natural foil for the America-hating Iron Sheik, and the two regularly worked against each other at live events. In fact, the two were set to square off in New Jersey one night and rode together to the event. Things got a bit hairy though when they were pulled over and arrested for, amongst other charges, drug possession. Duggan and Sheik were both fired the next day. At a roster-wide meeting the following week, a furious Vince McMahon decried the negative publicity and reportedly swore that neither man would ever return to the WWE. For Duggan, his fortunes changed at the end of August when WWE staged a retirement show in Houston for legendary promoter Paul Bosch. Duggan was permitted to work the show as a one-off and wrestle longtime friend and partner-turned-rival Ted DiBiase. Earlier in the match, Duggan badly injured his hamstring, but gutted it out the rest of the way in spite of the pain. As the story goes, Duggan's gritty performance, as well as the quality of the match itself, impressed McMahon, so much so that just a few weeks later, old Hacksaw was back on the company house show loop. Number 3, Sean Waltman, maybe a few minutes? It was a wrestling firing so short that it wasn't even reported on for over 2 decades, and we only know of it because said wrestler playfully mentioned it in a tweet. In 1997, Sean Six Waltman rounded out the NWO's Wolfpack with his buddies the Outsiders, and together they were a constant thorn in the side of Ric Flair and company. During a confrontation on one episode of Nitro that summer, Waltman yanked down the trunks of the Nature Boy, which is hardly a shocking sight. We've seen Flair's arse as often as we've seen parked cars. But Eric Bischoff had seen enough and canned the future X-Pac. As Waltman tweeted in 2019, Eric fired and rehired me the same night for pulling Rick's trunks down, showing his arse on TV, adding that he was already in hot water after using coarse language during a recent program. But what saved Waltman was that he was fired during Nitro by Bischoff, before somebody apparently realized that Waltman was due to wrestle Diamond Dallas Page in a later match. Thus, Waltman was magically unfired and the entire matter was quickly dropped. Number 2, Matt Hardy, 3 months. Like with the examples of Maverick and Emma, this rehiring was one that vocal fan sentiment played a part in, but the situation behind it was a bit more lurid. While mending from knee surgery in the early part of 2005, Hardy discovered that real-life girlfriend Lita was having an affair with his friend Edge. The couple split and Hardy made the details public, which led to heel Edge receiving increased jeers and babyface Lita getting booed out of most arenas. To the fans, Edge and Lita were clearly in the wrong here. That's why when WWE released Hardy that April for unprofessional conduct, fan anger only increased. Lita was then turned heel and put with Edge to try and capitalize on the scandal, which succeeded in mining the heat to great rewards. As for Hardy, it looked for all the world like he was going to end up joining brother Nero in TNA once his no-compete expired in July, with plenty of momentum and fan sentiment to his credit. But on the eve of that possibly happening, Hardy suddenly reappeared on Raw, attacking Edge in a work shoot meant to get people buzzing. He had taken some bookings for Ring of Honor before WWE rehired him, and wrestling for ROH only blurred the lines of reality for some fans. But Hardy's firing was very real, and everything after his surprise attack on Edge was strictly business. Number 1, Daniel Bryan, 2 months. Has it really been 10 years already? Yes, 10 years since the Nexus formed. 10 years since WWE flushed a promising young stable down the commode with truly short-sighted booking. 10 years since Daniel Bryan was to be the most experienced wrestler in that group of rebellious fighters. And 10 years since Daniel Bryan got fired for doing what he assumed was his job. You remember that night, Wade Barrett gathers the first NXT class together and orchestrates the unflinching destruction of John Cena, CM Punk, and the entire ringside area. In the midst of the violent scene, Bryan took down ring announcer Justin Roberts and strangled him with his own necktie. He also spit on Cena during the melee, and apparently both of these actions were over the line. Bryan was at first admonished for his brutish tactics by management, and days later was told he was fired, apparently because of possible pressure from big money sponsors. This, as you can imagine, didn't sit well with WWE fans, who took to mocking WWE's overly sanitized product, more so than usual anyway. The heat had long died down by SummerSlam, however, and Bryan was brought back into the fold in time for the pay-per-view. Food for thought, imagine the last 10 years of American wrestling if Bryan hadn't returned to WWE. How different would things have looked?